Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is the Astral, and doing my first interview. And like I said, changing up the channel, trying out some new things. So I wanted to bring a couple interviews, doing a live stream. Guy who I met at Contact in the Desert, Gene Sticco. He's been in spaces recently. He tried out and also participated for the UFO debates, which is the event that I was hosting during UFO Twitter Week. Had some great spaces, great discussions there. So I was like, you know what? Why don't we get on an interview? Because I love the vibe. He's got like old school research, kind of mentality, but also this fire that's like challenging, the ufology and the system behind it for disclosure. So really like that. So without further ado, let me bring in Gene. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. Good to see you. Thanks.
Awesome. So just give maybe the viewers a little bit of background and kind of what brought you up to where you are right now in ufology and the disclosure and all this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I retired in 2017 after almost 2 decades, a little bit over, I guess, military contract intelligence work. So I was 9 years in the military in the U.S. Air Force. Security specialist, nuclear weapons systems, aircraft security, did a bunch of awesome stuff in the military. Then I got into the oil and gas sector and global security risk management, which basically focused on transnational and geopolitical security risks, war, terrorism, political violence, extremism, a whole swath of topics that we covered there, a lot of compliance and things. During that period, I was contracted into several 3-letter agencies, CIA, Homeland Security, worked with DHS, Department of Energy, on different things. And retired in 2017, met my current wife, Natalia, in Latvia in early 2018. We were married by late 2018. I didn't waste any time on that one. And we decided to settle back in the U.S. And in late 2019, December, actually, her dad sent what he told us were just some of his old work that our son might be interested in someday. He died right before the new year, going into 2020. And afterwards, when we opened it and started looking at everything, we discovered, long story short, it was 119 pages of UFO reverse engineering, very detailed. That kicked off basically a 4-year intelligence and investigative effort on my part to understand what exactly these were, if they were, legit, or the ramblings, of a madman or anything like that. And by the end of 2024, we were sort of convinced this is important. We need to get it out there. So we knocked out a translation of just the papers. We published it in a book that was titled Engineering Infinity, Earth's First Interstellar Blueprint. Made it, as available and as accessible as we could, including like a free PDF viewer, on the main website. And it actually wasn't until June of 2025 that I sort of entered this community and started telling the story and trying to get more people's eyes on the materials, not only to perhaps help, work that other people are doing, but, also sense check myself to be like, here's all the stuff I'm finding in this. It seems to all, start feeding into a lot of these U.S. government programs. And it was sort of putting together a lot of pieces that even today people are still out there. Oh, we don't know this, we don't know that. And I sit back and I'm like, well, I kind of do know it and I can tell it because now I'm looking, at this issue through science and materials. And so, it's just been, going on. July will be my 13th month, I guess, in the public UAP community space, telling the story and sharing the information that we have and everything else that I'm finding.
What's been the most surprising part of getting involved, I guess, in the UFO field or UFO community for you these last 12, 13 months?
I mean, really, the most surprising thing is the resistance to the information. It's, on a number of fronts. There's the people, the George Knapps and the Lakatskys and the folks who have sort of owned the Russia UFO files narrative for 30 plus years. Their absolute avoidance and willingness to engage on the materials, never mind publicly, but privately. I mean, there's a good amount of time through these last 6 years that I attempted to have, just private outreach to understand, do these look like anything you've seen before? And it's just always been, very strange. And the other side of it are the people who are in the community now, and they are so convinced they are right about the way they're thinking or the thing they believe, or they know how it operates and how it works, that anything else they don't want to see or talk about, which again, is strange because, they come back and they're like, no, that's not how it operates. Okay, well, how does it operate? Tell me, you aren't understanding. Oh, the aliens told me. Or, I read it in, Jacques Vallée's book. And I'm like, okay, well, where's Jacques Vallée's reverse engineering? Right? I'm giving you the physics and the science behind this. You're giving me the story and assumption somebody else made. And they don't even want to try and reconcile the two of it. So that's
right.
The most surprising stuff. The sort of lack of truly intellectual curiosity on both sides.
Yeah, I think for myself too, just the field of UFO science, UAP science is just frustrating because it just feels so scattered and there's no direction. I came up in parapsychology, so a lot of the stuff that I learned about and got interested in this field was through psi research because I had precognitive dreams and remote viewing and all this. So when I had these experiences and then I looked to have some sort of understanding through science, through research, there was an entire field there. There's journals, there's, projects, people were doing conferences. Parapsychological Association was considered actually credible. It just doesn't feel like that is happening in the UFO world with the science. Yeah. Do you see the same thing, or how do you see that forming, the UFO field?
So I think the initial problem is that, we don't have one official confirmation of what UFO technology is, right? We have a bunch of ideas that are, sometimes claimed firsthand knowledge, that are generally second or third hand knowledge, that are based on observations of the phenomena, and and things like that. So it's scattered. What I found digging into my father-in-law's work was, again, this is the one thing that is a unified document, nuts and bolts, build level engineering of a UFO. What I've found is that all of those elements have been done throughout, particularly the U.S. government. I mean, I run it, U.S., China, and Russia, right? Yeah. They've all done the work that's there. We don't see it integrated anywhere. We don't see the point where it all comes together. And so I think the problem is that, and this is even part of the congressional problem, they're running around asking UFO questions where what they should actually be asking are technology questions. They can't ask the technology questions because they don't have a unified view of what this technology is. And this is what I've, now started inserting in it. But from the US side, they kind of want to have blinders onto it because it came out of Russia. It aligns, with OSAP and the DIRDs and things like that. So it causes a lot of uncomfortable questions and discussions and answers that I don't think they quite know or are willing to get bridge. So the answers are there, and this is the law work that I'm doing now, right? Tracking the science, tracking the materials. I can see where the materials, between the U.S., China, and Russia, the increase in the purchasing, who's purchasing them, which countries are denying the other access to raw materials that are all, related to this. So when you look at that picture holistically, breaking everything down in its elements, it becomes much more clearer. But like I said, the problem is, in general, in ufology, everybody just tries to be, an expert and be the source of truth on the thing that they think, rather than integrating all of the information that's out there and saying, okay, what's consistent, what's not, and then where can we find other elements of these things besides just looking, for something that says UFO.
Right. So I want to just kind of nail down too on the material. You're talking materials, and I wonder also, did you get information from your father-in-law's research about the technology? Because I think part of the technology part is that is tied very closely, most likely, to national secrets of like why we can't reveal that information publicly of what we're doing. We're developing the technology, but I see that a little bit different, like than revealing non-human intelligence, the existence of non-human intelligence. We've had people like Carl Nell come out, Jay Stratton. I've seen non-human intelligence. I've seen alien, but are the alien bodies like? Are you talking about just materials in terms of like ship, craft, things that are interacted with that we've got in our possession to try and figure it out?
Yeah, exactly. So this, what I've got the only thing I can really hold to is what's in the documents, right? And so those are the things I have some measurable criteria against. So like I said, it's science, it's materials, and there's a lot on consciousness in there too, which we can get into, which, ties in deeply, I think, with the psionic stuff. Out at Contact, sitting down with J2 and hearing, how he experiences things. It was like an epiphany for me on a lot of this. So, it doesn't get into his works don't get into biologics or who's operating the craft or anything like that, outside of the idea that consciousness is sort of the third aspect of being able to operate it, that humans are on a journey to get there. And there's different civilizational cycles that we go through that are embedding that ability in us. But it doesn't get into whether it's reptilians or whatnot. But, it poses the absolute question, well, then what sort of light form already would have developed this kind of capability? How old would that life form be in order to have developed it? So it's, I have to kind of reverse engineer some of the reverse engineering when I start, thinking about and asking questions like, what would a biological life form that is able to do all of these things based on the timelines that he described be like?
Yeah. And I also think about, I think there's a big spectrum here. Like it's not all of the, because people are like the phenomenon, like it's one thing. I think it's very dynamic, but I think about in terms of why UFOs would crash at all in the first place, if they're so advanced. But I think like there's levels to it, to where if a civilization were, say, 500 years ahead of us, that they probably would be crashing around and like kind of fumbling around and discovering this stuff for the first time and maybe crashing, that we might be able to back engineer something like that. But if we found something, that was hundreds of thousands of years, that we wouldn't even know, it'd be like sending a computer back to the old ages. They wouldn't, can't do anything with it. So,
yeah. I think I think that's, fair enough. all of the different, as you say, all of the phenomenon, all of the different descriptions of craft that we've had through, the generations and even today. And, we talk about it in spaces in here, well, we've gone to saucers, to cigars, now orbs is the thing. Is it just sort of a fashionable idea, jellyfish or whatever? I tend to try and take a more pragmatic, view of things and break things down to what could potentially be universal truths. So, I think one of them is no matter how smart and how advanced you are as a civilization, what you have is fit for purpose. So every one of the objects, the differences that we see aren't necessarily a matter of different civilizations and different life forms or, anything like that, but they are tools that are built for purpose. And that, whatever that purpose may be, throughout our own history of observing these different types may lead to some sort of indication of what exactly the intent is and what it is that's being looked at or monitored or influenced, if that's what we're, trying to ultimately search for.
And it feels like we're almost influencing ourselves with like media, because I look at like something like the abduction experience, which I do find credible in some instances, but a lot of things like I work on a show called Sound, Light, and Frequency with a couple of producers, and they look at films and the releases and topics, but they brought up that 2 weeks before Travis Walton's abduction, there was this huge movie premiere, and back then there was only like 3 channels at this point. 3 channels that you could watch. So,
I remember.
But they had this the UFO incidents, and it was a movie that played 2 weeks before. And I also, you look at like communion, things like the cover, how impactful that was of just people that were like all of a sudden then having experiences based off of some of the media. So I think media could play a part in this as well, as like not necessarily, but I think it's a great question of like Jacques Vallée looks at it as sort of like this control system that's adjusting its appearance and its interaction with us based off of our evolution of our technology and our consciousness and all this stuff.
Yeah, and again, that would be consistent with, what I'm finding in my father-in-law's work, that there is this universal energy field, information energy field, and we're all sort of connected into it. And, when you take a step back and you think about all those things from, kind of gut instinct to, you call somebody and they're like, oh my God, I just picked up the phone to call you, to just what you were describing, that we sort of channel collective energy into subjects, and then those subjects begin to manifest, right? And even people that practice manifestation, well, I'm going to sit and concentrate. So I think there's, again, some universal truth to that. I think that there's definitely some caution that needs to be exercised, and not get too excited about things, because there's certainly groups of people, I think, who become open to the experiences, perhaps more they are informed and educated. There are others who become susceptible to the suggestion because they're looking for something else in life, right? They've experienced something and this just resonates with them, right? But they equally could have been, if they watched the right vampire show, that have been a vampire. If they watched the right show about royalty, that have been, oh, I must be royalty, because, there's a bit of psychosis at play in some of this as well, right? I mean, and yep. We've got to, again, everybody for themselves have to, responsibly discern, what do you, which one of those it is, right? Are we dealing with somebody who is truly an experiencer and trying to get their minds around it? Are we dealing with somebody who, has a traumatic experience, and they're using the issue as a coping mechanism to understand something else?
Right.
And I see both of that out there.
No doubt. But I think the value too that comes of these spaces are an ability for people to, like, I think discernment is like one of the most important things people could have going through this. And the more I think you can listen to people and listen to ufology and all this stuff, and like you said, just not get too excited, I think you start to learn to how to navigate, because you really are, like, everybody sort of is navigating through this field. When they first get into it.
Yeah, and I always say there's like no bad information, right? But again, you just have to decide what is worth giving energy to in the moment, and what's worth just sort of putting on the back burner or adding to the list of things. And we might have to come back to it later, or we'll see if something corroborates with it later on. But I think we spend a lot of time chasing junk because, it's the other stuff is hard. Right.
All right. I'm bringing you in for the close up now.
Yeah.
All right.
Nobody,
tough question.
Nobody wants to do the work in this. I hate to speak in generalities. It's rare to find people that are really willing to put the work into this. I'll just leave it there.
Well, I think one of the
they like it spoon fed to them.
Well,
the answers.
One of the things that I was going to bring up too, and then I'm going to discuss in the live stream that I'm doing, is how to challenge ufology. Mm-hmm. Because I think you get into the field and everybody is like, oh, it's all, everything, you got to support it. You gotta just go along with it. And I think what I've found is it's difficult to do, because when you start challenging ufology, you start challenging some of these things, the narratives, people in general, cases like that, you're seen as the opposition, you're seen as the enemy. And I think it's a frustrating position. So how would you say, that your best approach would be to challenge ufology, to be able to come in and sort of push back on some of this stuff?
The problem is, I think that people are so emotionally invested in ufology, and they are so emotionally invested in their ideas of what's right. And it's just like anything else we're dealing with today, politics and social issues and things like that. People, their identities begin to meld with, their ideas. And so anytime you challenge that, they take it as a personal attack. That becomes, I think, first and foremost, what the crux of the problem. So understanding, I think, or trying to gauge when you're having these discussions, where somebody is on that spectrum of how close do they identify with the phenomenon that that's within their realm of interest, is then going to inform how you're able to, if at all, move forward and have any kind of pushback or discussion on it. Again, I try to pull back out of the weeds as much as I can and keep as much as we can, I think, focused on the things everybody can ultimately agree on, right? So I think a lot of the details we can't agree on, but in very general ways. When people ask me, well, what do you think it is? What do you think it's doing? What do I think it is? What do I think it's doing? The evidence, the true evidence that we have, really only indicates that we are under observation. We are being examined. Why? I don't know. That's when you have to start. But we're a biosphere. We're the only biosphere in this galaxy. Perhaps the idea that in a galaxy, only one planet is capable of maintaining life, at all, or one planet at a time. If we, accept the, Venus and Mars were habitable or capable of hosting life in the past. But for whatever reason, we are very interesting. And so there are a number of different ways that an advanced civilization is looking in on us and identifying, and measuring and monitoring what is going on. And I think that's the simplest overriding answer, that there's truly evidence to back it up.
Right. No, and I think that's a good starting point. I think you want to have like a foundation that's something you could just agree on. And I think having it evolve around the phenomenon itself is probably the best way, because once you get down into it, a lot of it turns into like this personality following, who believes what, who said this. And, even just, I wanted to ask you, it does seem like a lot of this stuff, we mentioned Lukatsky, there's Elizondo, Hal Puthoff, Eric Davis, Jay Stratton. Those are like the 5 guys that I would say a lot of this ties back to. Is that, to me, that's frustrating. Is that frustrating to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, again, a big part of my work and trying to understand all of it is the structure and the architecture of disclosure and of the UAP issue. And, you're right. There's actually about 12 individuals. It all ultimately goes back to, Hal Puthoff being the great grandfather of them all. And we can see, and, when we talk about it, and we notice the cycles, the patterns. Eric Davis just talked about it in the interview, every 10 years. Yes, absolutely. This is what's happening. And the frustrating part is, as a people, right, as the citizenry, we have no way to break through that. We have to rely upon trying to get our representatives to break through that. The problem is our representatives are also tightly connected and being influenced by this same group of people who are saying they're the disclosure advocates, but we're also the ones who at other points in their career were hiding everything themselves. They're not coming out to say exactly what they were hiding, but they're going to give you little breadcrumbs down the way, along the road. And again, all of these things are, practices in intelligence and counterintelligence and information management and controlled disclosure and, the transition by design, which is what we're going through right now, right? It's disclosure isn't the right word. They're not going to disclose anything. We are being transitioned into the new reality of UAP, UFOs being part of the natural world. That's what's going on right now.
It seems very driven, though, by journalism, that I think the issue that it's going to run up on, it's like the opposite. I mentioned parapsychology before. It's like the opposite of parapsychology, because parapsychology had all of the data. It had all the evidence and the science. It just didn't have the sizzle, It's like you got to go into a journal and you got to read about it. Telepathy is real. And, but it is, for the UFO topic, it's the opposite. It's got all the sizzle. It's got all the story. It's been driven a lot by these claims, it's kind of like this claim narrative that's been driven. But I think what it's going to run up against is this scientific, the new scientific council that Avi Loeb is, I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to try and confirm some of this stuff, not just to discover anything, but to confirm these claims. How do you see that playing out?
So I think Avi Loeb's an institutional distraction. I wouldn't count on him confirming anything. He has always been about discovery and never about disclosure. He doesn't want to go back and review anything and confirm it because, as he said 100 times, he doesn't like old data. He likes new data, and new data means new data that he's found so that he can make the discovery. And everything else just becomes part of the historical record. It's why I think he was, selected to do and head up this council, because anybody, who analyzes personalities in the intelligence community was going to recognize that, bring Avi Loeb in, we just bought ourselves another 10 years.
Right. Yeah, I think just even how it was structured. And I wonder, because we're getting some feedback now of how these guys who are involved in this council are seen in their own fields. So I think what the toughest obstacle is going to be is establishing a science in which other scientists take seriously at all. And I think that's going to be the most difficult part.
Yeah, because even with the peer review process, which most of it's supposed to be blind anyway initially, right? They're gonna, people are generally going to be able to identify, because of the subject matter, because of the writing style and things like that, who they're potentially looking at. And I think we run into, again, the same thing in the science community. People already have their ideas. And when you challenge their idea of their understanding of the science, they don't want, they don't want to hear it. And I've read, like I said, I'm no physicist. I'm the first to admit it. I just play one on TV now. But I've had this discussion with academics, as they've looked at some of my father-in-law, and they see one number, they see one thing, and they're like, oh, that's ridiculous, it's not da 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 da. And I'm like, well, where's okay, so what is it? Well, it's not going to be that. No, what is it? Where's the UFO that you reverse engineered, allegedly, whatever it is you want to call it? Where's your science for you to say, and it's like you have, well, that's not, that's not how physics works, or that's not how this works, or whatever. It's not how you understand it right now, right? It's those kinds of statements, instead of having that. And the other thing I say to them, if you expect one of these craft to land on the Washington Mall, and you're going to show up with your Stanley toolkit and find the right screwdriver head to start disassembling this thing, you're going to be solely disappointed. Right? You should expect that anything you see from science around this fits no paradigm that that should be your starting point, is that everything should be absolutely shocking and beyond your comprehension. And if there is something you understand, you should be like, okay, great, I have something to work with, But instead, they're like, no, I already have the understanding, and anything that doesn't already look like my understanding, then it can't be real. Well,
It would be like I think there's a quote that anything highly advanced, we would look at it like magic. We would see it as like impossible, like magic, basically.
Yeah, in a sense, we often had, used a little bit earlier the analogy of dropping off a cell phone to a caveman or a computer. We could drop it off to a caveman or one of these tribes that's never had contact, and see what they do with it. That's one. That's one thing. Now bring it there and try to explain to them how it works, and get their mind right. Not just drop it off, but actually sit there and take them component by component through it. And they're going to be like, it's not possible. That's not how it works. No, they're still going to be in denial over it.
Yeah. And you mentioned psionics earlier, and I wanted to get a little bit into the consciousness topic as well. Do you see the consciousness psionic side as like a part of this research or discovery of the phenomenon, like through this avenue of psionics?
Yeah. Again, it has to be. Right. And I think I think this is something that has a historical background to it, that I haven't quite found all the evidence of. But, my working hypothesis is this, that, essentially in that early period, the 40s, 50s, right, U.S. and Soviet Union both had craft available to them. They both went down the reverse engineering. They both understood a lot of fundamental things about it at that time. And one of the things that they understood, however they understood it, was that consciousness, telepathy, and the ability for the operator, the physical operator, to interact with the craft in order to control the craft and maneuver and guide and navigate was the third most integral function. And I think both nations took a very different path. I think the Soviets took a path of really focusing on what that meant and how consciousness develops, along with, how do we enhance or expedite that. I think the U.S. took a much different approach and focused on, and essentially said, that's a lot of bull. We're just going to muscle our engineer our way through it, America, right? And we don't need no stinking consciousness. We can just, build it out. And I think for decades, that was one of the core tensions of what was being worked on. I think we've got a lot of technological developments from on the U.S. side around that, and biometric understanding and things like that. But I think it's really only been over the last 10, 15 years where they've finally seceded, the point, and been like, you know what? We can't engineer our way through consciousness. Now they're trying to catch up. And that's why I think there's been a lot more openness and promotion and talking and discussion and encouraging and interest, because now they're trying to catch up over 50 plus years on an issue in a science that they basically ignored. And they're going to want to fast track it now to catch up, perhaps to, where the Russians are, or, seemingly pull ahead of where Russia or China is on all of it. But it's, absolutely integral. And I think that, the practitioners of it, people who have, natural ability and developed ability and things like that, I think are, they're on the right course. I don't think everything is what they think it is. But again, this is, based on, me going back to documents and trying to kind of contain things at a provable level, or a level that has some kind of framework around it. But absolutely critical, needs to be done. It's the only way we get there.
I mean, I was excited when I learned about Skywatcher and what they were doing, like their initiative of going out with people who were having these experiences more frequently, psionics, CE5ers, remote viewers, whoever. I mean, I was working on a project with my friend Jared, where we were outfitting experiencers and sending them out to do 10 sessions. And so they would have an EEG, multi-camera, heartbeat, a monitor, these different, measurements that would all be synced up. So you could see if there was an event in the sky, what would be happening. And so when I heard about Skywatcher, that they were spending millions of dollars into doing this, and they were recruiting people that were having these experiences, I was like, well, that's a great way to, I think, collect data to figure out and to show, especially when Gary Nolan was involved. I'm like, okay, well, they're going to publish some stuff. Hopefully, like this is going to be peer reviewed, taken seriously. So I think the initiative itself is good. I think what it turned into was more of this like commercialized, it's fizzled out. But I think the idea of it, of having us as the community, we could do something like that. It would be not as scaled up, but we could figure something out to where we're working together as a network.
Absolutely. And this one, out of contact, I had that, got to sit down at lunch with J2 and Science Bob was there, and Mike Batista, and the other gentleman that Mike's, on this new company with, and I was talking to them about, again, what I've found is, I think if that process could be tightened down even more, by taking some of what I've found where it comes about optimal locations for craft operation and things like that. I've spent over the last year and a half really kind of mapping and looking at different corridors and the way the craft the way the craft has to interact and create gravitational and magnetic fields does have a reliance on several environmental factors. So when you talked earlier about, them crashing and things like that, there is still susceptibility to environmental factors that could potentially throw these things off. Again, based on the designs and everything.
Are you talking about like hotspots?
So it's interesting. I'm talking about optimal locations. but there are a number of optimal locations that are also hotspots.
Okay.
And, you know, I differentiate it because a lot of, I think when we're talking about hotspots are dependent upon observation, which means it's dependent upon population. So you have to kind of do a little math and statistical engineering to understand and really evaluate when there is a sighting. Obviously, the likelihood of that sighting occurring in a highly populated area is much higher than a remote area where there is a sighting. But if you can get more people in a remote area to have that sighting, then there's a little more validity to it than, you know, the opposite. So I think when I talk optimal conditions, there are places that are not known hotspots that would be ideal to go to, because it would offer a much more controlled environment for these types of experiments.
Right. No, and I think that was the toughest part that we found, is to have a controlled environment, or, you know, just a controlled testing at all. Outside, it's extremely difficult. You know, you would have to bring it into somewhere, but you know, I think that's the real challenge. But I'm hopeful. All right, as we go descend here into the last about 10 minutes, I wanted to ask you just your thoughts. You know, the recent organization formed with Dylan Borland and Matthew Brown called Vanguard. It was a whistleblower support, I guess, organization. Yeah. I wanted to get your thoughts maybe on just what you thought about that, and if that you feel like is going to be a productive avenue for whistleblowers to get support, or how they're going to be supported.
Yeah, I think if that, I'd almost look at it as like a type of unemployment insurance for whistleblowers, is essentially, you know, what they need to get to, you know, perhaps, because it's one of those things, right? Like, nobody starts a job knowing they're going to blow the whistle someday. It becomes a very unexpected, you know, event. And the idea that an organization exists that can help them through the process, as well as keep them whole, which is ultimately, you know, the financial aspect of this, as they go through it, I think is good. You know, I think that there's got to be a lot more work on the back end of that, though, because you're ultimately, you know, not going to be able to necessarily get somebody back into, you know, their six-figure, you know, top secret clearance job after they've gone through the whistleblower process. And so, again, helping people manage their careers, if they are, again, at that point where they're looking for a, you know, or need that career to continue. What are they going to do with that? So, you know, it's good they've announced it. They're going to start getting, you know, getting some funding together. I saw they have a long-term rollout plan, which I think is good, because it does give them some flexibility for whatever developments do come, as far as amnesty for whistleblowers who come forward, or I should say not amnesty, but the waiver that allows them to come forward without retribution and whatnot. But you know, yeah, it's certainly going to take a while, I think, before it really gets to be what I think their vision is for it.
Yeah, I think too, there's a lot of hints that there's still a lot of whistleblowers that we don't know about. I think, you know, a lot of the time people are like, well, we want the first hand, you know, like it always kind of ties back to David Grush saying he had 40 firsthand whistleblowers. You know, I think that kind of falls below the radar a lot of the times now. But I think, you know, I want to be like, where are those guys? Like, where are the firsthand whistleblowers? We need those guys. But, you know, and then that's the whole thing of things need to be set up, you know, the UAPDA, whistleblower protections, yada, yada, yada. But you know, at the same time, I'm very critical on this whole, I can't say it or I'm going to go to jail thing. you know, like I can't reveal this, or, you know, Eric Davis even in this last thing was like, I can talk about the 4 races, but I can't talk about this because I'll go to jail or something. So how do you see all of that?
I mean, listen, if I was their age, I'd roll the dice, you know, for as long as it takes one of those cases to come forward, right? So you have to do it. The government's got to build the case. They got to prove that, you know, you violated something. You know, yeah, a lot of it happens in you know, closed courts because it is classified information. But I think anyone who came forward in that kind of catastrophic, you know, I'm letting you know exactly, you know, what I've seen and you know, where it is, and I'm making it all public. I think, you know, you want to talk about donations rolling in for legal defense and things like that.
Right.
It's going to come, you know. But on the opposite token, you know, that's a lot to put your wives and family through, and you know, potential expenses. And these guys got nice little nest eggs and retirements, and, you know, they don't want to mess around with it if they haven't, you know, protected it properly. So
I think it's the amount of disruption. The amount of disruption I think it would cause in their lives. But I think bottom line is just what you were saying. And I've said this before. I think if somebody actually would go through that process of, like, the camera crew, the news shows up, they're getting taken in cuffs, like, because they revealed this classified UFO, like, they would become rock stars.
Look at the guy that shot the insurance executive. He got millions and millions in accounts for
Netflix show. And
you know, exactly. That's what I'm saying. It's, you know, I get it. I don't know if you know, I was a big oil whistleblower, you know, in 2017, you know, and I knew going in, you know, I knew doing that, I was done in, you know, that there was no going back, right? I was retiring anyway, but there certainly was going to be no going back after I did that. You know, and yeah, you worry about, oh, who's going to say what? Is anyone going to, you know, but you know, and you had people, oh, it's big oil, they're going to come after and kill you. And, you know, and I'm like, well, I've been chased by people my entire life and career. So join the club, right? Just kind of used to it. So but like
you have to expect that though, right? Like, you have to expect, I would imagine, you know, that's what kind of I'm surprised about is, you know, we talked about the Vanguard, Matthew Brown and Dylan Boylan, but they seem almost surprised of what's happening to them. I would think that they would have expected that, like, you're coming out with Corbell. Corbell has worked with whistleblowers before. I would have thought he would have given them an expectation of, like, you're going to lose your clearance. You're going to kind of be, like, shunned out. This is going to financially hurt you. Like, this isn't going to be, like, the best thing.
Right. So, not a surprise they had to learn on the way out. Listen, and, you know, again, I come from Boston. I had a lot of shady people, friends and family, and you know, connected to this, that, and the other through the years. I got to tell you, out of all of them, federal prisons aren't all that bad either. So, you know, a lot of guys go in and have a great time, especially the minimum security camps and things like that. They, you know, if you're that committed to the issue and that committed to getting it out, you know, it's
let it fly. Yeah.
You know, right. It's not like being in Attica or, you know, some being in there. You're in there with other white collar guys, you know, playing cards and shit all day. So
so that's basically catastrophic disclosure. I guess the last question I'll ask you here is, all right, we've got it. How would catastrophic disclosure play out in your eyes, or you know, a genuine disclosure? I guess if the rest of this year we're about halfway through, second half we get genuine disclosure. What does that look like for you?
Well, I mean, obviously it's you know, it's got to be the White House, the Oval Office level announcement. You know, if it's catastrophic in the idea, you know, something lands in the middle of nowhere. To be honest with you, I think it's upheaval for a couple of months. Again, assuming everything is benevolent and it's just sort of a, hey, we're here, we exist, and life is good. You know, I think, again, we're, as a species, we are very adaptive. I think all the research shows everybody kind of already believes it, and is ready and is interested and wants to know. I think there's a level of idea that like once we know, then like every time we walk outside, it's gonna be like the Jetsons, and there's gonna be these UFOs, and there's gonna be aliens in the supermarket with us, and when we go to parks, and they're gonna be walking their octopuses instead of dogs, and shit like. And it's like once everybody realizes like nothing's gonna change, like we know, and there's gonna be some people who see it and some people who don't see it. It's like. Because I've asked people, I'm like, how many times have you ever seen the B-2 stealth bomber? They're like, well, never. Okay, so it's going to be the same thing, right? Once we knew about the B-2 and the F-117, like we didn't see them all over the place flying, and there's hundreds of them. So it's like once that settles in, I think it just becomes part of the normal reality. And within a couple of generations, you'll be telling your grandkids, they'll want to know. There was a time when you didn't think aliens were real, or people didn't think it. It was like, but
yeah. I mean, they thought society was going to break down because they told us,
like we're going to need embassies, and we're going to need resorts, and we're going to need, we got to build all this infrastructure now for them because we know they exist. Like, relax. They've made it tens of thousands of years. They've got away. We don't have to go crazy over this. But what it does do, and this is a lot of the work that I'm doing now, is it does create other ripple effects throughout industry and business and science. And, there's a lot of wins in this if true disclosure comes out, particularly with science and the technology and healthcare and all of these sort of industries, that it will have an impact on, in so much as the ability to bring new things to market, changing our infrastructure and energy systems and all of that great stuff. But again, those are decade block issues that we're working through, right? They can come out tomorrow and be like, we're going to have free energy. It's still going to take them a while to get it to everybody's house.
Roll it out.
Like, calm down. You're going to be an old man before you see it, even if it happens tomorrow.
Right. Now, the impact, I think, just having disclosure and then the rollout. That's why, people are like, oh, if disclosure happens, researchers can go home. Everything's done. It's like, no, that's actually just the beginning. That's
absolutely.
The start.
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, thank you, Gene. Appreciate it. Where can people find your? Want to let you give some references and some links here where people can find your stuff.
Yeah. So the core work of my father-in-law's papers is all at engineeringinfinitybook.com. That is where everything is available. All of the links to the complete archive. You can look at all of the original documents. You can read all of the assessments. You can see all of the connections from that site. And then the new initiative I launched is called Black Grove Global Risk. And Black Grove is actually, my father-in-law's surname is Chernohayev. The English version of that is Black Grove. And so, but this is a UAP intelligence analysis and forecast website at blackgroverisk.com, blackgroveglobalrisk.com, which is more geared toward business people, C-suite executives, board members, financial analysts, and it sort of breaks down UAP disclosure and what that means for businesses and insurance and things like that going forward. So I've spent a few months sort of organizing that and putting materials together, and just rolled it out as of yesterday formally.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I'll put those links down there too, so people could check it out. But that's perfect kind of timing for the conversation too, of throwing that in there. So yeah, I think it's going to be impactful. Disclosure, how it plays out the rest of the year. I'm just here enjoying it. We'll have some more shows coming up. Thanks again, Gene. Really enjoyed it. Thanks everybody for coming by. Like and subscribe to the channel. We'll have more interviews like this coming up soon. Thanks, guys.
Peace.